You might want to wash your hands before dinner, Dad. City folks aren't used to the smell of honest work. The words dripped from my son-in-law's mouth, coated in a thin veneer of jest that couldn't hide the thick contempt beneath. He smirked at his guests, a collection of polished, soulless clones in tailored suits, who chuckled obligingly. My daughter, Clara, looked down at her plate, her cheeks flushed with a shame that wasn't her own, but that she wore for me. I looked at my hands, the knuckles thick, the skin cross-hatched with a lifetime of calluses. He was right. They smelled of soil, of sweat, of the earth I had tamed and bent to my will. But he was also wrong. They didn't smell of honest work. They smelled of power. They smelled of an empire he couldn't possibly comprehend. And as I sat there in his gleaming white penthouse, a simple farmer in a borrowed suit, I made a quiet promise to myself. This boy, this arrogant child playing at being a man, was about to receive an education in what honest work truly builds. The journey to the city had been long, a 12-hour bus ride that rattled my old bones and gave me far too much time to think. I watched the sprawling fields of corn and soy, my fields, give way to the concrete and steel tentacles of the metropolis. For 30 years, I had avoided this place. It was the world that had taken my Clara, polished her, and refined her until the daughter I knew was just a faint, shimmering outline beneath a stranger's expensive dress. I hadn't seen her in 5 years, not since her wedding. I'd paid for it, of course, a sum that made my accountant's eyes water, but I'd sent the check through my lawyers. At the time, Mark had insisted a small, intimate ceremony was more their style. I now understood that intimate was code for a guest list that wouldn't include an embarrassing dirt-cake father with a country drawl he'd sent a thank-you note, typed, not even signed. My love for Clara was a vast and quiet thing, like the land I farmed. It was the bedrock of my life, the reason for every sunrise I'd greeted and every harvest I'd fought for. Her mother, Sarah, had passed when Clara was just 10. I remember holding her small hand at the hospital, Sarah's own hand cool in mine, her voice a reedy whisper against the sterile beeping of the machines. "Give her the world, John," she'd said, her eyes fixed on me with a desperate intensity. "Don't let her struggle like we did. Give her everything." I had squeezed her hand and nodded, a vow passing between us that needed no more words. That promise became my religion. The struggle she spoke of was all I had ever known. I was born with nothing but the dust of the plains in my lungs. My father had lost his farm in a drought, and I spent my youth as a hired hand, my back burning under the same sun that had betrayed my family. But unlike my father, who had been broken by the land, I saw it as an adversary to be understood, not a god to be appeased. I watched, I learned, I listened. I learned the language of the soil, the rhythm of the rain, the subtle signs of distress in a wilting leaf. While other men spent their meager earnings on liquor and fleeting comforts, I spent mine on books. Books about crop rotation, soil science, hydrology. I was ridiculed for it. "Look at Johnny with his books," they'd sneer. "Thinks he can read his way to a good harvest." I let them laugh. Their laughter was fuel. When Clara was born, the promise to Sarah hadn't yet been spoken, but it was already growing in my heart. I was sharecropping a miserable patch of land, barely coaxing enough from it to feed us. I'd look at my daughter, her eyes so full of innocent trust, and feel a cold dread. I would not fail her. That was when the idea began to form. It wasn't a lightning strike, but a slow dawn. Water. Everything was about water. The droughts were getting longer, the rains more unpredictable. Everyone was using flood irrigation, wasting 90% of the precious resource to evaporation and runoff. It was inefficient, lazy, and utterly reliant on the whims of nature. There had to be a better way. I started experimenting in the dead of night, using spare parts and scrap metal. I built a prototype for a subterranean drip irrigation system, one that would deliver water directly to the roots, controlled by moisture sensors I cobbled together from old radio parts. My first dozen attempts were catastrophic failures. I flooded a whole section of my landlord's field once, and had to work for 3 months without pay to cover the damages. But I didn't stop. I worked in the fields from sunup to sundown, and then I worked on my invention by lantern light until my eyes burned and my hands shook from exhaustion. All I could see was Clara's face, Sarah's dying wish. The breakthrough came on a sweltering August night. I finally calibrated the sensors correctly. I watched as a precise, measured amount of water seeped into the soil around a single tomato plant, not a drop wasted. It felt like I had discovered fire. I patented the design with the last of my savings, selling my father's old pocket watch to afford the legal fees. The first few years were leaner than ever. No one believed in it. The big agricultural suppliers laughed me out of their offices. Why would we sell a system that uses less water? We sell pumps, son. More water means more pumps. They saw me as a fool, a hick who didn't understand business. So I did it myself. I took out a loan against the only thing I owned, my future, and built the first systems by hand. I installed them for free for a few skeptical neighbors, asking only that they pay me a percentage of the increase in their yield. The first harvest came in. Their crops, nourished by my system, had survived a brutal dry spell that had decimated the surrounding farms. Their yields were up by 40%. Word spread like wildfire. Within 2 years, I couldn't build the systems fast enough. I founded a company, Heartland Agritech, a simple name for a simple mission. I hired local folks, people who had been beaten down by the same hardships I had. We built a factory on the outskirts of town. Clara was in high school by then. She knew Dad was busy, that the pipe business was doing well, but it never burdened her with the details. I didn't want her to grow up with the weight of wealth on her shoulders. I wanted her to have the freedom to be a kid. I sent her to the best private school in the state, then to a prestigious university on the East Coast. She was brilliant, of course, just like her mother. She studied art history, something so wonderfully impractical that it filled my heart with joy. It meant she never had to worry about practicality. My promise to Sarah was being fulfilled. It was at university that she met Mark. He came from old money, or so he claimed. His family had a name that carried weight in certain circles. He was charming, handsome, and ambitious. When Clara brought him home for the first time, I felt a knot in my stomach. He walked through my simple farmhouse like a health inspector, a faint, condescending smile playing on his lips. He called me sir, but sounded like an insult. He talked about his tech startup, using a blizzard of acronyms and buzzwords that meant nothing to me. I just nodded, my hands tucked into my pockets. Clara was smitten. She saw his ambition as drive, his arrogance as confidence. I saw a hollow man, a facade of polished surfaces with nothing of substance underneath. But she was happy, and my promise was to give her everything she wanted. If she wanted him, I wouldn't stand in her way. Over the years, Heartland Agritech grew beyond my wildest dreams. My little invention was now in use in over 50 countries. We had diversified, moving into organic fertilizers, drone-based crop monitoring, and sustainable farming consultancy. I was the sole owner, the quiet, unseen force behind a multi-billion-dollar global enterprise. I had a board of directors that ran the day-to-day operations, a team of lawyers and accountants who managed my fortune. But I never left my farm. I lived in the same house Sarah and I had built. I drove the same 10-year-old pickup truck. I still rose with the sun and walked my fields, my hands in the soil. It was who I was. The money was just a tool, a means to keep a promise. I had given Clara a trust fund that would ensure she never had to work a day in her life, but I'd instructed my lawyers to frame it as a modest inheritance from her grandparents. I never told her the truth about my success. I thought wealth might poison her spirit, just as it had so clearly poisoned Mark's. I was waiting for the right time to tell her, a time when I was sure she was grounded enough to handle it. That time never seemed to come. Her calls became less frequent. Her visits stopped altogether. She was absorbed into Mark's world, a world of galas, yachts, and superficial friendships, a world where her simple farmer father was an inconvenient, embarrassing truth. Which brought me to this dinner party, a monument to Mark's ego. He was holding court, pontificating about market disruption and leveraging synergy. He was a caricature of a successful man, all style and no substance. And he used me as his prop, his comic relief. My father-in-law here, he's the real deal, he announced to the table, a shark's grin on his face. Salt of the earth. He thinks a diversified portfolio is planting corn next to the soybeans, the table erupted in laughter. Each laugh was a small, sharp stone thrown at my daughter, who flinched but said nothing. She just stared at her wine glass, swirling the deep red liquid as if it held the answer she was too afraid to find. I met her eyes for a fleeting moment. I saw a flicker of the little girl I used to know, lost and scared. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by the cool, practiced mask of Mark's wife. I excused myself, claiming I needed some fresh air. The penthouse had a sprawling terrace overlooking the city's glittering expanse. I stood by the railing, the wind cool against my weathered face. The door slid open, but they didn't see me in the shadows. It was Mark and one of his friends, another suit. "Seriously, how do you put up with him?" the friend asked, lighting a cigarette. Mark chuckled, a low, ugly sound. "It's a small price to pay. Claire's got a little trust fund, you know? Nothing huge, but it helps keep the lights on. Besides, it's good for my image. The wife's humble country roots play well with some investors. Makes me seem grounded." He took a drag from his friend's cigarette. "The old man is a walking cartoon, though. Did you hear him at the table? I reckon God. It's like a parody." The friend lowered his voice. "Speaking of investors, how's the fundraising for ConnectSphere going? I heard a rumor that Vancorp pulled out." Mark's jovial facade vanished. His voice dropped, becoming tight and strained. "It's a temporary setback. We're pivoting. About one last shot. A big one. A meeting with the money man behind Abernathy Capital. The guy is a ghost, a total recluse. They say he came from nothing, built an agricultural empire from scratch. He only invests in things he believes have grit, so I'm playing up my bootstrap narrative. He's my whale. If I don't land him, I'm finished. The whole company is a house of cards, man. I'm leveraged to the hilt. If this falls through, I'll lose everything. The penthouse, the cars, all of it." He let out a shaky breath. "Clara has no idea how bad it is. She thinks we're on top of the world." He laughed again, but this time it was brittle, desperate. "Maybe I should hit up the old farmer for a loan. I bet he's got a few $1,000 buried in a coffee can somewhere." They went back inside, leaving me alone in the dark with their words hanging in the air. The initial sting of his insults faded, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. The pity I felt for my daughter, the anger at her weakness, it all coalesced into a single, hard point of purpose. This wasn't just about disrespect anymore. This man was a fraud, and he was dragging my daughter down with him. He had belittled the very foundation of my life, the grit he was now so desperate to fake, while being completely oblivious that he was speaking to its very source. My promise to Sarah wasn't just to give Clara the world. It was to protect her. And Mark was a threat. The lesson he was about to learn would no longer be a gentle one. It would be absolute. The next 2 days were a blur of tension. Mark was a caged animal, pacing the apartment, his phone practically glued to his ear. His confident swagger had been replaced by a frantic, nervous energy. He was short with Clara, snapping at her for the smallest things. She tiptoed around him, her face a mask of anxiety. He spoke constantly of the upcoming meeting with Mr. Abernathy, the name spoken with a mixture of reverence and terror. "He's notoriously private," Mark explained to Clara, as if I wasn't there. "Insisted on meeting here. Wants to get a sense of the man, not the boardroom. Everything has to be perfect." He looked around the pristine apartment with a critical eye, then his gaze landed on me, sitting in an armchair reading a book on soil erosion. His lip curled in disdain. "And for God's sake," he hissed, "when Mr. Abernathy gets here, you stay in your room. Or better yet, go for a walk. A very long walk. The last thing I need is you embarrassing me with your folksy wisdom." I just nodded slowly, turning a page in my book. "Whatever you say, son," I said, my voice calm and even. Inside, a plan was taking shape, as intricate and carefully constructed as one of my irrigation systems. That afternoon, I made a single, quiet phone call from the guest room. I spoke for less than 5 minutes. It was all the time I needed. The day of the meeting arrived. The air in the penthouse was thick enough to choke on. Mark was dressed in a ridiculously expensive suit, his hair slicked back, a sheen of sweat on his forehead. He had rehearsed his pitch 100 times, his voice echoing through the apartment as he practiced in front of a mirror. "We are not just a social media company. Mr. Abernathy. We are a paradigm-shifting ecosystem of curated digital interaction. It was all meaningless jargon, a flimsy cover for a failing business. Clara had arranged a platter of hors d'oeuvres that nobody would eat and was now wringing her hands by the window, staring down at the street as if awaiting the arrival of a king. "He'll be here any minute," Mark announced, adjusting his tie for the 20th time. He looked at me again, my simple flannel shirt and worn denim a glaring stain on his perfect canvas. "I'm serious, John. Don't say a word. Just nod and try to look. Simple. He likes humble beginnings, remember? Don't you worry," I said, giving him a small, tight smile. "I won't cause you no trouble." My accent, the one he so despised, was a tool now. I leaned into it, each reckon and ain't a carefully placed stone on the path to his ruin. The doorbell chimed, a sharp, piercing sound that made both Mark and Clara jump. Mark took a deep, shaky breath, straightened his shoulders, and plastered a wide, artificial smile on his face. He smoothed his suit jacket one last time. "Showtime," he whispered, then strode to the door and pulled it open. Standing in the hallway was not the grizzled, earthy farmer Mark had likely envisioned as Mr. Abernathy. It was a man in his late 50s, impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, with piercing blue eyes and an air of quiet, unshakable authority. He carried a slim, leather briefcase. This was Arthur Davies, my chief legal counsel and the public face of my investment arm for the last 20 years. He was the man who had translated my vision into contracts and clauses, a shark in a world of sharks, and fiercely loyal. Mark's face lit up with relief and avarice. This was a man who looked like money. This was a man he could understand. "Mr. Abernathy, an absolute honor to finally meet you. Please come in, come in. I'm Mark Trent." He shook Arthur's hand with a little too much enthusiasm. Arthur's expression remained neutral, his handshake firm and brief. He stepped into the apartment, his sharp eyes taking in everything in a single, sweeping glance. His gaze flickered over to me for a fraction of a second, and I gave him the slightest of nods. "Thank you for having me, Mr. Trent," Arthur said, his voice a smooth, cultured baritone that was the polar opposite of my rural drawl. "A lovely home. Thank you, thank you." Mark gushed. "Can I get you something? Water? Coffee? A glass of scotch?" "Water would be fine," Arthur replied, his eyes once again finding me in the armchair. Mark, following his gaze, let out a nervous laugh. "Oh, don't mind him. That's just my father-in-law, John. He's visiting from the country." Mark shot me a venomous glare that clearly meant, "I told you to disappear." Arthur walked past Mark, his expensive leather shoes making almost no sound on the polished marble floor. He stopped directly in front of my chair. Mark hovered behind him, looking confused. Clara stood frozen by the window. Arthur extended his hand to me. "It's good to see you again, sir," he said, his voice filled with a genuine respect that made the air in the room crackle. I took his hand, my callous palm meeting his smooth one. "Arthur," I said, my voice steady. "Good of you to come all this way." Mark's jaw slackened. His eyes darted between me and Arthur, a frantic, sputtering confusion dawning on his face. "I'm sorry," he stammered. "Do you two know each other?" Arthur turned to him, his expression coolly professional. "I believe there has been a significant misunderstanding, Mr. Trent. My name is Arthur Davies. I am chief counsel for the Abernathy Capital Fund. I'm not Mr. Abernathy." Mark's face went white. You're not the investor?" "No," Arthur said simply. "I am merely here to facilitate the meeting and handle the legal framework, should an agreement be reached. The principal investor, the man you know as Mr. Abernathy, is already here." Mark stared at him, his mind refusing to process the information. He looked around the empty room wildly. "Here? Where? Is he on his way up?" Arthur didn't say a word. He simply turned his head and gestured with his chin, a subtle, deliberate movement, back towards me. I slowly, deliberately placed my book on the side table and pushed myself up from the armchair. I stood to my full height, feeling the stiffness in my back, but standing straighter than I had in years. I looked directly at Mark. The blood drained from his face, leaving a pale, sickly mask of disbelief. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with a horror that was slowly, agonizingly, turning into comprehension. "Mr. Abernathy," I said, the words clear and sharp, my country accent suddenly gone, replaced by the precise, confident tone of a man who has chaired 1,000 board meetings. "Is a pseudonym we use for preliminary inquiries, Mark. It allows us to gauge the character of potential partners before we reveal our hand. It helps us weed out the pretenders." I took a step forward. "My name is John Abernathy, and Heartland Agritech is my company." The name of my company hung in the air. It wasn't some obscure farming co-op. It was a titan of the industry, a name whispered with awe in the financial pages Mark so desperately read. He would know it. Oh, he would definitely know it. His knees seemed to buckle. He leaned against the doorframe for support. "No," he whispered. "No, that's not possible. You're a farmer. I am a farmer," I said, my voice hard as granite. "I'm a farmer who patented a subterranean irrigation system that revolutionized modern agriculture. I'm a farmer who built a global corporation from nothing but dirt and determination. The honest work you so enjoy mocking? This," I said, gesturing around at his opulent prison, "is built on the foundation of that work. The food you eat, the clothes you wear, the technology in your phone. It's all connected to the soil you hold in such contempt." I took another step, closing the distance between us. He flinched. "You talked about my folksy wisdom. Let me share some with you. You judged me by the dirt on my hands, but you never once thought to ask how it got there. You judged me by my accent, but you never bothered to listen to the words I spoke. You saw a simple man and assumed he was a simpleton. That is the arrogance of a fool, Mark. A fool who builds his life on borrowed money and hollow words." I looked past him to my daughter, who was now openly weeping, her body trembling with shame. "And you," I said, my voice softening with a sorrow that cut deeper than anger. "You stood by and let him do it. You were so ashamed of where you came from that you forgot who you are. I gave you the world, Clara, just like I promised your mother. But I never intended for you to trade your soul for it." Mark finally found his voice, a pathetic, strangled croak. "Please, Mr. Abernathy." "John, I didn't know. If I had known." "I'm so sorry. You're sorry you got caught," I said, cutting him off. "You're not sorry for the disrespect. You're sorry because the walking cartoon you mocked holds your entire fragile world in his hands." I turned to Arthur. "Mr. Davies, I believe our assessment is complete. Abernathy Capital will not be investing in ConnectSphere. The company lacks a viable product. Its leadership is compromised, and its entire financial structure appears to be, as Mr. Trent so aptly put it, a house of cards." Arthur nodded crisply. "Very good, sir. I'll draw up the official notice." I looked back at Mark one last time. His face was a ruin of collapsed pride. The sneer was gone, the arrogance shattered, leaving only a desperate, terrified child. There was no satisfaction in his defeat, only a profound sense of waste. "The meeting is over," I said quietly. Then I walked over to my daughter, who couldn't even meet my eyes. I put a hand on her shoulder. "Clara," I said gently, "let's go home. Months have passed since that day. The city is once again a distant glitter on the horizon. I'm back on my farm, and for the first time in a long time, I am not alone. Clara is here." She left Mark that same afternoon. The fallout was catastrophic for him. Without my investment, his company imploded. The creditors descended like vultures, and he lost everything. The penthouse, the cars, the friends, it all vanished like a mirage. The last I heard, he was selling insurance in a suburban strip mall. He tried to contact Clara a few times, a string of desperate emails filled with apologies and blame. She never replied. The healing between my daughter and me is a slow and quiet process. We don't talk much about that day. Instead, we talk about her mother. We walk the fields at sunset. I show her the original workshop where I built my first prototype, the rusted pieces of metal that became the seeds of an empire. She works in the garden, her manicured hands slowly becoming reacquainted with the soil. There's a piece in her that I haven't seen since she was a little girl. She is rediscovering not only where she came from, but who she is. The mask is gone. My daughter is home. I I still run my company, though I let Arthur and the board handle most of it. My life hasn't changed. I still drive my old truck, I still wear my flannel shirts, and my hands still smell of the earth. Wealth is not about the money you accumulate. It's about the values you refuse to sacrifice. Humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. And respect is not something you demand with a loud voice and an expensive suit. It's something you earn with quiet strength and a life of integrity. That was the lesson I had to teach my son-in-law and, sadly, my own daughter. It was a hard lesson, a painful one. But like the toughest crops, the most valuable lessons are often the ones that grow in the hardest soil.